My name is Herlinda Ramos, and this is where I live at 13801 Somerset Road. I lived on a large lot that my husband had this land before we got married. We built our first home here, which is the middle part of this house, and we've just improved it as years have gone by. We were married 55 years before he passed, and I'm still living here. It's going on 58, 59 years. And like I say, this is my home. Hi.
Hi. Come on in.
Yeah. This map that sits on my wall, it shows small battles that were fought and who won them after between 1835 and on. My daughter, my youngest daughter, is a self-taught artist, and she found this at a thrift store. And it's supposed to be a very valuable map from what I've heard. It shows a lot of good history, but you more or less have to use a magnifying glass to find whatever you want to find on the map. And my daughter found it at this thrift store, and she bought it for me for a Mother's Day gift. And it sits on my wall, and it's going to be left to my granddaughter that's a teacher. Herlinda Ramos. In Spanish, it's called Herlinda. You leave the H out. I was born east of Somerset, Texas, in Bexar County. And one of my grandfathers of ranch. Jesus Gonzalez. There's 5 generations that were born in that ranch from the late 1700s till. From there, my parents moved into, they either rented or leased old abandoned farms. And my first memory was on Evans Road, just off of Somerset Road. We were living in an old house, and there was a dairy there. Later on, my dad ran the dairy, but that's my first memory at that place. 1942, January the 10th, 1942. Well, the only thing that I can remember that my mother talked about later was they had neighbors, and there were Amelia and Santiago Casillas from Somerset. They were relatives of my mother's side, and they were neighbors, and they thought I looked real cute because I had chubby face and stub nose. So they nicknamed me, they call me Chata. In Spanish, that's what they call me because my head and my face was real chubby. And some people still call me that. I really don't know. I never asked my mother. There's really I haven't found so far any Herlindas in my, ancestors.
What is your middle name?
Terrazas, Terrazas. The last name, that name came from Mexico, that Terrazas. There's people in history books over there from their history in Mexico, way in there, I don't know, the town or the state. But my grandparents, my father's grandfather was born in Mexico at the borderline of Del Rio. And that's all I know about that. And my dad's, well, both sides of the family there is, I'm finding out. I don't have as much history on my dad's side of the family because there really wasn't any history with government. But I found out that my grandparents, my dad's parents, came from Del Rio to Lozoya, Texas, which is further east from Somerset. And there's where my dad was born in 1911.
Did the family name ever change?
Not the last name. All I have found out so far that my dad's uncles, some were named like my dad, Perfecto. And that's as far as I've known, it does come down within the generations. Yeah.
Were you baptized?
I wasn't baptized in Somerset. I already looked into it. But I just assume maybe somewhere in San Antonio.
And what religion would that be?
Catholic.
Okay. Tell me.
She was born August 14th, 1990. North of the Medina River, that's where her father lived. There's where he was raised, and there's where she was born.
What house was your mother born in?
Well, I just assume she was born on her grandfather's home, which is not standing anymore. His name was Francisco Herrera.
And when did she die and where?
Well, she died in 2006, and she died at home, at one of my sisters, my youngest sister's home in West Bear County. Now, my dad, like I said, was born in Lozoya, Texas, and that's still in Bear County, in 1911, and they lived there until more or less he was about, let's say, 5 to 9 years old, and then they bought a place there in Barnard on Benton City Road, my grandparents.
What month was your father born?
On October the 3rd,
In
1911.
1911.
There's 12 of us. Mother and my dad had family from about 1935 up until 1961. And some had more years in between them, but I'm the fourth one down from those 12. My two older brothers, older than I, are deceased, and my oldest sister is in a nursing home with Alzheimer's, so I'm the oldest one left with a mind. Rudolph, Charlie.
And your sister?
My oldest sister's name is Olga.
Olga. And then the next one after you?
Beatrice, and then Emma, and then Perfecto Jr., and then Roy, Henry, Irma, Raymond, and Michael.
Okay.
Well, my dad was a man of all trades. He started as a farmer. Then he ran that dairy in the 40s, mid to late 40s.
Where was the dairy?
On Evans Road. That's where my first memory is from that ranch where we lived. And from there we moved to Somerset Road, and he did some farming there. And I guess did odd jobs because at the beginning of my mother and my dad's marriage, they had moved to Austin. And he learned a little carpentry up there. He made a home over there in Austin. My mother used to talk about it. He did it wrong. He started with the roof and then the floors. But no, that's what he continued to do the rest of his life, like in the 50s on. He worked at Kelly when we lived on Somerset Road. That's where I started school from that residence on Somerset Road. So he worked at Kelly when Kelly was asking for all types of trades, and he was a carpenter there. I know that the front neighbors, my mom got along with them real well. They farmed. They planted vegetables and sold them here in San Antonio at the market where all the farmers came and brought their vegetables to sell. And as far as rich people, they were in Somerset. My mother had worked with those people. In Somerset, there was people that my mother, as a young girl, let's say 13 to 15 years old, she worked in their homes. And those were the Hoffmans, the Ernst, and the LaGrange family. That's all I remember her talking about. Anyway, she worked with them up until she got married at 18. She would help her mother out with her second family.
Okay.
My grandmother had remarried after my mother's father passed away. He passed away 5 years after my grandmother married him. There was 5 children then, and she remarried a year later. Had 4 more, but the husband was abusive, so she divorced him, and her grandfather moved her to Somerset, somewhere in Somerset, and there's where my mother quit school to help her mother out raising the other 4 children, because that ex-husband didn't help at all. The bare necessities, like I say, the food and clothing and all that. You mean my immediate family? Yes, it was food. My mother would can some things, vegetables when they had them and stuff like that, but they needed to, raise. There was, by the time we lived on Evans Road, there was 4 kids too. And then she had several kids before I went to school at 7. So that's mainly what the money was spent on, because, well, the rent, if they had to pay rent in these farms, they leased them or either rented them yearly. I don't know how they went about it. So my dad always worked. My dad worked outside the home, and my mother stayed home and worked at home.
What was the house like that you lived in?
Well, the first one that I remember on Evans Road, it was kind of long. It had a big porch in the front, a long porch. And the kitchen was to the north part of the house, and then the bedrooms and living area was to the south.
What was it like on the inside?
Well, that I don't remember really. I just assume it was all wooden inside. That's the way the homes were back then. I know that my mother always worked with the windows or winter, putting in newspaper in between the cracks and stuff like that to keep the heat inside. Like I said, there were old homes. There were, God knows when they were built, But usually they had a room for the boys and one for the girls, and then the parents. 3 bedrooms. And if you don't have the 3 bedrooms, you turn the living room into a bedroom. Yes, that's the way it worked.
So what about the second house?
Well, that one was just about the same. There, after a while, after we lived there a few years, we got propane installed. We didn't use no more wooden heaters or wooden stoves to cook. At the beginning we did, but I'd say maybe late 50s, no, about mid-50s, my dad installed a butane tank, and we had butane gas for the heating and cooking. Electricity also. The first house we didn't have electricity. It was all lamps. I remember helping wash the cover for the lamps and stuff like that. You have to be very careful. Yeah.
Outside bathroom?
Yes, both houses until we moved to San Antonio. Yeah. Like I say, it was all the girls together and all the boys together. There was like, at the beginning it was 2 boys and then my older sister and I. And then there was several girls in between, and later on when we moved to San Antonio, there was the rest of the boys.
What about outside of your house? What places stand out in your mind when you were a child?
Well, at the first house that I have the first memory is the dairy. We would run over there and watch the cows being milked. My dad started with milking them by hand, and then he had machines to do it. And so that was just exciting for us to see all of that. They had a stock tank for the cows, you know. Sometimes in the summer we would go in there and, you know, swim. Well, I didn't ever learn how to swim, but I'd get in the water. And the second house, we didn't have too much entertainment. There were some old buildings that would play house. We'd pretend to play house. We would get together, you know, times, and we'd have our little kitchen and stuff, and we made do with whatever was around, you know, to pretend we were playing house in those old buildings.
Did you have chickens, cattle?
My mother always liked to have chickens for the eggs, and she knew how to hatch baby chickens and raise them. She knew how to protect the eggs in order for them to hatch. She had learned that in her childhood. And we always had a cow. My brothers would help milk it and feed them. My brothers did the outside work and we helped inside. And we all took turns making the butter. We would shake the container to make butter. We had butter and cheese and milk.
What kind of a container did you shake?
Well, either a glass, or sometimes my parents would buy like molasses in a little can, and that would be used to make the butter too. And then the buttermilk that was left over, my dad loved the buttermilk. He drank that. I didn't like it, but he did. Later on, there when we lived on Somerset Road, my mother bought one of those ice cream makers that we had to take turns shining it to turn in the little handle, and we'd have to have that salt, the special salt to make it with, and oh, well, that was a treat. It wasn't all the time. Yeah. We had a neighbor right in front of us. He was an older man. He was already living there in an old 2-story house, and he was a blacksmith. And at times he would buy milk from my mother. If we had extra milk, he would buy a pint of milk for himself, and we would deliver it. We took turns delivering it to him. And he was funny. He had to rinse out the glass, and he drank that water. That's what I remember. Whenever I delivered or helped deliver the milk. Yeah, his last name was Archer. I don't remember his first name. Yeah. My mother had that lady neighbor, like in front, a little ways down, and she was an older lady. And they visited, and the old man too. And Then she has some further down, a younger lady that would come. She would do like crafts and stuff. And she would visit my mother. She would walk about a mile and come and show her stuff. And my mother would buy little things from her. Dolls and stuff that she made, flowers. Yes, I have a picture of my mother and my father. This was in their 60s. This was one of the last pictures they took together.
Who would you say had the most influence in your life?
My mother, because she was always home. I tell my story now that I never thought I was poor because my mother took care of things. We always had her at home. She was always cooking and showing us how to do stuff as we got older. So I never felt myself being poor because she took care of, she made some of our clothes, and we had a lot of hand-me-downs, but she would make them nice for us to wear. Well, sometimes she would come shopping into San Antonio, especially when school was about to start, and she'd take time and sew for the girls mainly. And later on, I remember there used to be a man that would come to the ranches, and he was from San Antonio. I don't remember his name, but I can just see him. He would sell materials. He would take them from San Antonio and take them to the different ranches, and that's how she got some material too.
What about feed sacks, flour sacks?
Oh yes, we got some of those. We had an aunt, one of my mother's aunts, that was her mother's sister, that they had a feed store here in San Antonio, somewhere on Medina Street. And she would save her the pretty sacks, you know. And she would make us clothes with those. We would come and visit her once in a while, and she'd have a stack of them for us. When we lived there on Somerset Road in Somerset, Texas, there used to be a dance hall. It was run by Pete Casillas. There was an older Pete Casillas. It was close to K Street, I know. It's still standing, but it's turned into a home. They used to celebrate fiestas there. And they would have like the fiestas they have downtown now in San Antonio for 16 de Septiembre, a lot of different Mexican tradition fiestas. And they would have little booths with games and different kind of foods around the dance hall. And that lady in particular, that neighbor that was friends with my mother, she didn't have any children, so her and her husband would set up a stand there. So we look forward to going to those. Well, church, we didn't keep up with church up until we had to go to catechism to do our first communion there in Von Army. But the lady that helped run the church, her name was, they call her Mana. I don't know if that was her real name, Vara. Mana Vara, but she was married to a Reyes. And that family ran that Von Army church for a long time. Now her daughters are running it as sons. I mean, as far as as helping run it, that's what I mean. She would come and pick us up because my mother never learned how to drive. So that lady would go to different homes and pick up children, and they used to call them station wagons then. So a lot of people could fit in there, and she drove us over there and brought us back.
Any accidents in the family?
Well, I remember one in particular that, well, my dad always worked, and sometimes he came in late, and we had a long driveway from the road, and we would see him coming, and some of the older ones would run to meet him over there, and he usually drove a pickup, and they would jump in the back. One day, one of them fell. He ran over his legs. It was one of my older brothers. I don't remember which one, but not a real bad accident. But one of my middle brothers, his name was Perfecto Jr., he fell off a porch there at the house and he hit the back of his ear. So he was in the hospital for a while. He couldn't hear, and finally they made him well enough to where he had a little hard of hearing in that ear, but he retired as a fireman here in San Antonio as an adult. He grew up and went to school in San Antonio. Anyway, he made it. That was the only accident that really affected the family.
That's good. Do you speak any other languages?
Spanish, more or less, Tex-Mex, I would call it. Well, as I was growing up from the family, because I was born here in Texas, it was already Texas, and you learn it from family. But now, at my age, I tend to be talking to a person sometimes, and I'll mix it. If, like, an Anglo, I know better, I don't put any Spanish words in there, but if it's Latin person, I would mix it, And I'm doing that with the young people, and I'm getting kind of cautious about it because they're not understanding what I'm telling them because they don't know. Nowadays, they don't know how to speak Spanish.
When did you learn English?
Well, in school, little by little, I went, as I grew up, I learned more and more.
Can you tell jokes in English or Spanish?
Well, I'm not a very good joke teller. I don't know how to tell jokes because I lose the pitch to it. But I did hear a German joke on the 4th of July because my oldest daughter is married to a German. His father told me a German joke, so I'm going to tell it. It wasn't in German language, but he's a full-blooded German, and they settled in Seguin, his family. But when I saw him on the 4th of July, he shook my hand and he told me, Ted is his son that is married to my daughter. He says, I asked Ted if he had bought any sauerkraut. He says, no, well, I forgot to buy some because we were going to have hot dogs and hamburgers. And he says, oh, well, he says, he asked me, do you know why Germans settled in New Braunfels, Texas? I said, no. And I was already giggling because I know he likes to tell jokes. And so he said, they stopped to rest there and they started looking up at the trees, and the oak trees had a lot of that moss that grows on them. And he says, this is where we're going to settle because these trees grow sauerkraut. So that was a joke, and I remember it. But as far as me remembering old jokes and stuff like that, they don't stay with me. I remember going to my grandpa's house. We live on Evans Road, and then Benton City Road is a little ways. We would sometimes cross fields to get to their house. My grandpa farmed. That was his main, thing, to farm for the family. Nicanor Terrazas. And he raised the best watermelons ever. He's the sweetest watermelons. I remember that. He raised corn and beans and stuff like that, but the watermelons, I'll never forget. Just the only thing about Christmas, the tamale making, I learned, I mastered it with my mother-in-law, and she was a good tamale maker. So I taught my daughters, and now my granddaughters were teaching people up north in college how to make tamales because they know how to make them. And empanadas and what else, around the holidays mainly. I do a lot of baking. I learned how to bake pretty well.
What about family heirlooms?
Well, that I didn't get any. My mother had a locket that her father had given her mother before they got married. It was engraved to my grandmother from him. But my mother chose to give it to my youngest sister because she was the one that stayed living at home the longest. And it's still in her possession. It was pure gold. And Then my mother always kept a crucifix in her home, because back then people didn't have churches. They would have an altar in their home, and that's where they would pray from the Bible and stuff. So she always kept this crucifix, and it was in a frame with glass front, and it was the original one, and it was from her mother. That was her mother's. So she chose to give it to my oldest sister. So it's still in her family's possession. So I really never got any heirlooms.
And
Well, the crucifix, it was my grandmother's, so she was born Gonzalez, Ofelia Gonzalez.
okay,
She was born in 1999.
show the picture.
This is her picture. This is where they're buried together. This is my grandmother in the black.
Okay.
This was before she married, and she's wearing the locket that my grandfather gave her. And this is my grandfather when he was a young man. This is Rogelio Herrera, before they got married. And just before my mother passed away, my oldest sister had somebody put them together from the shoulders up. And so that threw on my mother, because she never had a father. This was her father, that picture. Yeah. So, and then I have the headstone where they're buried together. They're in our family cemetery at Ruiz Herrera Cemetery. They keep it with her on an album.
Did your parents give you any advice?
Well, education, that was pushed on us, education, because neither one of them had a lot of education. They learned about things in life. That was the education at home. The older parents, older grandpas would teach their children and grandchildren about things that they had to do in life, farming and everything. And back then, women, were to stay home and learn how to sew, cook, can, and all of that stuff. And they never learned how to drive because, well, in the 1800s there was no cars, but my mother never learned how to drive, and when she tried to learn how to drive in the 40s, late 40s, she was too nervous. She would giggle and she just couldn't get the hang of it, and she never learned. And matter of fact, I never learned how to drive until I got married. My husband insisted that I learn, because he was a truck driver and he was going to be away a lot from when we were raising our family. So he wanted me to take over that duty, and I did. We didn't go out much, but we were always home doing something, either working or eating. And well, the advice, like I say, they try to teach us how to do for ourselves for later on in the years. And my two oldest brothers, they mastered carpentry with my father, working with my father. My oldest brother did a lot of work for me and my husband after we were married, because we rented houses, and he would come and do work for us. And he taught his boys how to do carpentry, and they know how to build a house from the bottom up. They tell me, everybody tells me that I'm the one that looks the most like my mother. Which I do think so. She has the same dimple that I have, and the face, the smile. I'm always smiling, like she always, no matter how hard of a life she had, she was always smiling. And that's the thing that my husband didn't like about me, because I smiled too much, and people would come up to me and talk to me and stuff like that. And he didn't like that, but anyway, I still have that smile. Just the fact that I learned how to drive, I learned how to run the family finances, and I did everything for the family. in my family, my immediate family, because I had to, because my husband was doing the work and he was not here half of the time. I have the story that I tell people. I forged his payroll check for many years and never got caught because he wasn't around. So that's a little story I have about that. And I never got caught.
What was the most important thing to your mother?
Well, to keep us healthy and as well dressed as she could. That was the most important thing to her, to teach us to.
And what about your father?
Well, he, like I say, he mainly was working all the time, and he was hardly ever home, really, as far as I can see it now, because he was working, and on the weekends he'd work around the house. He did a little farming on the weekends, and keep up with the houses, I guess. He took care of the finances, and my mother just stayed home. Well, I was active, from what I hear, like at that dairy farm. My brothers would do the hard work at the dairy. You know, the ice would be delivered, and they would have to break it down to keep the milk cool after it was they milked the cows. And one day I was standing behind my oldest brother looking in and see what he was doing, and he hit me on one of my eyebrows with the little hammer that they broke the ice with. And I bled a little bit, so I went crying to mother, and she wanted to know how it had happened and all of that. And he said, well, she was over my shoulder, I didn't see her. So I was real active as a young child. We played games outside and stuff like that, but that was about it. When I got into middle school, I liked music, and I went into the band there at Somerset. My first instrument, it was called a tonet. It was a little plastic instrument that we played, and that's how I learned my music on that first. And then I played trumpet in the band.
What kind of clothes did you wear?
Mainly dresses and skirts and blouses. Like I said, my mother mainly made all our clothes for school. We ate the common food, you know, the beans and rice, and sometimes we'd have fried chicken when they killed the chicken from the farm, and they made calabacita with chicken and corn at different times. But anyway, one thing that I loved, during the winter when we came home from school, my mother would always have a big pot of rice pudding with raisins, and that was my favorite food to eat, because you know, you come home hungry from school and it was cold and that was warm, so that's why I remember it.
Do you have a favorite recipe?
Not any in particular. When I worked, I learned how to bake, cook, because I would teach basic cooking in homes and teach nutrition. So I really don't have any favorite, really. I like a little bit of everything. I don't like steak that much. I eat my hamburger steak instead of the real steak. I guess I never learned to eat it as a child, and I don't crave it. As long as I have what I crave right that minute, you know. And but now at my age, I go out to eat a lot, so I have a choice. You know, my mother always knew how to cook just by hand. You know, I do have a recipe for rice pudding. My mother made a real good bread pudding too, because we always had milk and raisins. For some reason, we had raisins all the time. So she made a bread pudding that was very good too. That I don't remember we ever celebrated birthdays. I guess it was so many of us that I just really didn't until we were older. Well, holidays, family members would come over, mainly to eat. We didn't do too much exchanging of gifts, except our parents bought us a little something. We always had a stocking for Christmas morning, and they would have apples and oranges and a little bit of candy in there. And we used old socks for stockings because there were so many of us. So that was our, mainly our Easter. My mother would make us Easter baskets. And what she would use the oatmeal boxes, and she would decorate them, cut them in half, and she knew how to do all of that. That's what she had learned in her life, to do their own decorations and everything. Flowers for the cemetery. On All Souls Day, she started making them ahead of time, and she would make even the wreath for the flowers. So she knew how to do a lot of things. That's how they grew up, so, that's how she raised us too.
Mexican celebrations?
Not really when we were young, no. Until we were almost about teenagers, that's when we would go to those fiestas that were celebrated in Somerset. Yeah. Well, I really never learned how to dance. I don't know how to dance because I guess we were so sheltered that, we weren't allowed to dance. I don't know. I love music. I love mariachi music now. But when I was growing up, we just went to those celebrations. We heard the music, and that was it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, anything further than high school. I did start taking some kind of clerical work for office, schooling, but I didn't finish because it was hard for me to get to the classes, so I just quit. Yeah. And so...
Where were the classes?
They were downtown close to San Antonio College, sort of, in that area. I went a couple of times, and I gave it up because I was missing too many, because I didn't have a way to get there. We lived a good close to maybe 10 miles from... We lived out Highway 90. I really didn't have any dreams because I knew, there was so many of us that our parents couldn't even send us for further education. So that was it. I accepted life as it came. Like I told you further back, that I never knew I was poor because we always had our mother at home, and I had everything having her. So I really didn't dream that much. Well, I know in later years I got a job. Well, we were determined to try to help out in the summer, and I got a job on West Commerce at a linen company. We worked at a linen company, folding towels and all of that, me and my sister. We were about maybe 17, 15 years old. Beatrice, her and I worked there in the summers. When I was younger, there on Evans Road, we had a creek go by our house, and we would go swimming down there. They would take us, the whole family would go, and we would go swimming, take breaks, whenever they could take us, because we weren't allowed to go by ourselves. Yeah, like I say, we were sheltered a lot, and I'm glad because I'm still alive.
Did you have a childhood game that you loved to play?
I was thinking about that, the jacks. Whenever we were able to get them, we got them, and we treasured them. We played jacks against each other, me and my sisters. Yeah. When we were younger, when we were in the farms, there was abandoned buildings like chicken houses and stuff like that. That's where we played house. We pretended to have our own house. Yeah. So we always got dolls for Christmas, and of course we kept them as long as we could. We played with them a lot. Yeah, yeah. Well, I know my brother older than me, Charlie, he used to tell stories and jokes. He liked to read. I know he talked a lot when he was older about the Chisholm Trail and Camino Real. He would read and he would tell us the stories about those. Well, it was true stories, you know. But he liked to joke a lot too. It would help my mother, like I said, she knew how to do everything. She knew how to crochet, she knew how to embroidery, and she made her own flowers, and we would help her out with that. We would collect leaves from trees or wherever we could collect them from so she could wax them and put them on the wreaths when she was making the wreaths for All Souls Day. But as far as our own crafts, we just did stuff that we did at school, stuff like that. That's the only thing that I remember. Now I do crafts, but not back then. We always had a dog or two. And my mother liked parakeets, so we had parakeets. At one time, when we lived on Somerset Road, we kept hamsters because my mother had them before. So we had some, but, you know, sometimes they'd get loose and we have a hard time finding them, but yeah, that's what we had, hamsters. Inside, helping iron and make the beds and sweeping and mopping later when we got older. Yeah, my mother had a routine, you know, to teach us to be good housewives. No, not that I can think of, I don't remember, no. Not really, I remember about spots when you've been reading. But as far as a favorite book, no. I really didn't like school either, you know. I hated history in school because I would tell my mother, why do we want to learn about the past? We want to learn about the future, not the past. So, and now I'm here trying to learn the history of the family. Yeah. No, violets are blue and something like that went, but not really. I just, you know, I love to read it, you know, but I don't make it up. No, I don't remember. Probably they had some at school that they would show at school, but I don't remember the movies. Well, later on, as I was in high school, I remember coming downtown to the Alameda Theater where we had boyfriends, and and we would, but I don't remember the movie really. When my husband was courting me, he bought me a watch that I admired in high school from a teacher. And I think they call them petite watches. It was a real tiny watch that would go through your ring. It would go through, it was so tiny, it would go through your ring. And I still have it. I just gave it to my oldest daughter. And I didn't think it was working because I used it all the time, and sometimes I'd be washing dishes or washing clothes. I'd put it in my pocket. Sometimes I washed it in my washing machine twice and dried it. But I had it fixed and it's still working. It's a Bulova. Until after I got married, I was around between 18 and 19. Like I said, my husband, I didn't know how to drive, and he told me, you're going to have to learn. And my two my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law were younger, and they're the ones that taught me down in the county roads. They taught me how to drive. And from there I progressed and I went and got my driver's license.
What were their names?
My brother-in-law was Roy Ramos and Doris May Ramos. They were at home. My very own first car, that's when I was going to start working as I was married. I had been married, let's say 10 years or so, because we would share one vehicle, though we always had a pickup. And then I was going to start working, so I needed a car. And it was a 1989 Volkswagen. It was black. That was my own first car. Well, we would hear stories about the wars and people that had to go into the service and things like that. That's the only thing that I remember. Well, we did have my dad in the 50s. He would buy old radios and he'd fix them. Sometimes they would have to run in with a battery to the car so we could hear programs, different programs, boxing and different things like that. Yes. I always attended public school, and I started school in Somerset. But when I started school, I did not know a word of English, maybe a word or two that I've heard, because my mother's mother-in-law forbade her to speak to us in English, so we didn't know how to speak. She knew it, but she obeyed her mother-in-law. That's how they were taught back then. So I had to go to first grade twice. The people that didn't know English would have first grade, we were separated. And once I learned English, I went to the first grade again for English. I didn't like reading that much when I was younger. Yeah. Math, I really liked math. Well, I remember Mrs. Robinson from Somerset. That I think she was like my maybe second grade teacher. And then later on we had a Mr. Wilson. He was the vice principal, I think. Anyway, he taught in junior high, him and his wife. They were very patient with us. They were very good teachers. Well, as a matter of fact, I ran into I just joined the church in Somerset and I ran into her again. Her name was Florinda Martinez. And her sister was in my grade, Anita Martinez. And we would see each other once in a while in different events that we went to. But Anita's not around anymore. And so I befriend her older sister, Florinda, again. So we go to breakfast and we remember old times after church. We would go to some parties once in a while. We weren't allowed to go to too many. And usually it was like my brothers and my sisters, we would go together. We were invited to parties that people had. Once in a while to the movies. A movie or two here and there, but not all the time. Not really. No. Like I say, it was mainly when we were invited to parties, but no hangouts. That I don't remember the time, but we were always with our brothers. They were older and they would drive us, so. Not that I can remember. I never had any problems. From Somerset Road, and we moved to San Antonio in '57. And so we were in the Northside District, and so we had to go to the Well, I started at junior high there, the last year of junior high. I know in my high school years at John Marshall, I didn't know anything about, you wouldn't hear anything about drugs or nothing like that. I was, like I say, I was very sheltered. And you didn't hear about that at school like nowadays, you know. Well, I had a favorite dress. I remember my mother bought me that dress. She didn't make it. And it was sort of like a summer dress. It had a black and white flowered print on the bottom and the top was black. And it had a strap, kind of round neck. That was my favorite dress in high school. Yeah. But like I say, my mother always guided us in that sense. They never really had anything. The only, well, I mean, I didn't have problems with the dress code there at the school. My brothers, because of their hair, they insisted on wearing long hair, and they really were expelled from school because they wouldn't cut it. My two oldest brothers. But we lived kind of far from the school, and the transportation wasn't good. If either we didn't go with a friend to events or whatever. Yeah, we had school buses to go to school every day, but for other events, you know, it was hard to get to. So we really didn't go to too many. I remember going to some event at school, and my brothers were there too, and my best friend at that time. And you weren't allowed to go out the building. But I don't remember if it was a dance or a prom there at the school or what. And my brother went out with this friend of mine, and they got in trouble for going out of the building. I remember them telling, but I didn't. So I always was very obedient. To me, it was simple. You know, you just went and did the ceremony, came back home. I wasn't an honor student, of course. I had a hard time learning because of the difficulties at home. That's why I see it now. And this is why I think a lot of children go back here nowadays when they have problems at home, that they don't focus on their studies as much, to concentrate on different things. You know, we didn't have the access to libraries and stuff like that. What do you got done in school, that's what you learned, in other words.
Did you?
I met him at a family function. It was like a wedding, home wedding. Yeah. It was one of my uncles, and he married his sister, my husband's sister, so that's why I met him for the first time. He was tall, dark and handsome, but he had the bright blue eyes like the sky, so that's mainly what I fell in love with first. And then, you know, as I got to know him, he was a hard worker, so I knew he could take care of me. We really we didn't get engaged. We just decided to elope because my dad wouldn't let us go out together to different things and stuff, so we eloped. That was my engagement, I guess you might know. We got married that day. On March the 1st, 1960. In Seguin, Texas. I was wearing a white sweater. It had some beading, and the neckline was kind of oval, and a skirt that I had made at school in homemaking class. It was a wool, aqua color skirt. That was a quick legal, you know, marriage. Being married, they married you the day that you went there. And they took care of everything, and you were legal. You got out of there. No, it's just that he was a good provider. He always worried about, you know, having us, you know, fed and everything, and the best he could. He was a truck driver, so he would hustle, put in hours so he can make more money. Yes, that's what he was doing when I married him, so that's what he did the rest of our married life, except the last few years. He wasn't able to drive anymore, so they gave him a job in the fields. He worked for Aldrich Nursery, and it was a wholesale nursery in one army. They're skirts of an army, yes.
Okay.
Our home, we went shopping for, he had the land, he had a big lot, and so we went shopping for a house, and that's what we bought first. Where I live now, we've lived there all our married life, and I still live there, is 13801 Somerset Road.
Okay.
2. Well, Catherine was born February the 27th, 1961.
And
Gloria is my second. I just have 2 daughters. She was born on February the 4th, 1965. That's her full name, just the first name, but they didn't have any middle name. My husband he didn't grow up with a brother. His baby brother was the last in the family, so he was close to his sisters, so he chose to name him after his 2 oldest sisters.
okay.
Well, they were good kids. I was always home with them up until the time that Gloria went to school, and they were good kids. They didn't have any kids around them. We didn't have neighbors close by that they would go outside the house just whenever we had company. I mean, like cousins come over for company. That's when they played with other kids. One thing that comes up to mind right away is that Catherine liked to read ever since I can remember. I would read to her, and then she would pretend she knew what she was reading, but she was looking at the picture. She memorized the words. So she always liked to read. And Gloria never liked school. She went to school just because she had to. And at the beginning, I had a hard time with her staying at school. She even got sick. I had to take her to a doctor. Her pediatrician made her realize that everybody had to go to school. So that's the main things that I remember about them. They never got in trouble, really. No, other than Catherine, when she was a teenager, she had a weak knee. She fell in the bathroom and pulled some ligaments. And now as an adult, at 55 or so, she had to have surgery. Part of her cartilage was caved in. And I don't know if that was there all the time or not. The doctors didn't see it when I took her to the doctors, so. And Gloria, she was a tomboy. She liked to climb trees and, boy stuff. She had a pony. She was the one that liked horses, and she had her first pony that her grandparents gave her. I know he was white. Daisy, that was the name of the pony. It was a Shetland pony, yes, and she loved to ride it. At my house, we kept it at our house. Mm-hmm.
What was the best thing about being a parent?
Well, I really don't know, just teaching the girls right from wrong. I remember that, my husband was away a lot of times, and we would just sit and talk, and I would give them examples of things that, close people close to us had done wrong, and I would compare, bring that up to them to teach them right from wrong. I remember that, just talking my head off, trying to make them understand. Yeah. I really didn't have any worse things. My daughters were good girls, and they participated in school activities, and I would take them and bring them. I didn't know how to drive when I got married, but my husband said, you're going to have to learn, because he was going to be around a lot. So he knew that I was going to have to be, taking them and bringing them to school. We lived about 9-10 miles from the school, so.
What kind of a car did you drive then for your first car?
Well, we would share a pickup, whatever pickup that we had for the family. I would go drop him off at work when he needed to go out on a trip, and then I'd go pick him up when he came in. So up until around 1972, that's when I bought my first car. It was a 68 Beetle. It was a black Beetle, Volkswagen Beetle.
Did they have any sicknesses, illnesses, measles?
They had the chicken pox. I remember they got them from somebody. They both went through that, But no measles. I don't remember the measles or mumps or anything like that. Just the chicken pox.
What are you the most proud about your children?
Well, I always get compliments on my girls, since they turn out to be good people. That's was my goal, really, to make them to be good people, and I always get compliments. My oldest daughter studied all her adult life, and she's got a doctorate degree. She's got a law degree. But Gloria, like I said, she never liked school. And when she was going to finish school, she asked me, are you going to think less of me if I don't go to college? And I says, no, not really, as long as you're a good person and, a hard worker and all. And she's awesome. She knows how to do anything a boy or a man knows how to do, really. She's very strong, because like I say, she was always a tomboy, and she's not afraid to take on a challenge. And eventually she became a self-taught artist. She knows how to do welding, and she works with horseshoes and things that she just thinks up in her mind. She makes them.
Do you have pictures of them?
Yes, I have their graduation picture from high school. This is Catherine from high school, and this is Gloria.
Okay.
And then I have one of Catherine's college. This is when she got her master's in Southwest Texas State in San Marcos. And I don't have a picture of her when she got her doctorate degree, but I have her program where she finished at St. Mary's here in San Antonio.
Okay.
So,
What brings you the most pleasure?
well,
Gardening?
Well, when I was raising the girls gardening, I did a lot of gardening around my house, took care of rose bushes, and I even planted vegetable gardens, small ones. But mainly just relaxing and, taking it easy. And now I like to read a lot because I'm by myself a lot, so I've taken up reading.
Okay. Has your attitude about life changed through the years?
Well, a little bit, because when you get married, you're innocent of a lot of things. And when you live, as old as I am, 76 years old, you tend to be more defensive. I myself am defensive now in life. I don't take too much from anybody. I mean, not that I am looking for it, but at the beginning, of my marriage, I was just very innocent of a lot of things that, around people and stuff. But now I feel that, I'm strong. It's made me stronger in life.
What do you think about getting old?
Well, I kind of worry because I live by myself. I own my own home, and I think about when it gets time that I can't take care of myself. I've always been very independent all my married life because that's what my husband wanted. I took care of everything for the home, finances, and everything. So that's what I worry. But I was telling my neighbor that they keep tabs on me. I have two neighbors, and we talk about life and everything. I think I'll recognize when I can't take care of myself anymore, and I'm even thinking of just checking myself into a nursing home in my right mind if I figure that I can't do it alone anymore.
What was the best age of your life?
Well, I really can't say because I finished with my daughters until they got on their own and everything, and then I helped raise my 3 grandkids.
You have a picture of that?
Yes, I have some pictures, not too many. This is my oldest granddaughter.
Her name?
Her name is Herlinda Ramos, Ibarra, like me. They named her after me. And this is my second granddaughter, Felicia Ibarra, and they named her after her other grandma. And they both finished college. Herlinda went to Notre Dame. She's got a lot of scholarships from school. And she finished over there. I have her invitation to me. I wasn't able to attend their graduations because my husband was real sick at the time, and I didn't want to leave her. So Felicia finished from it's in Chicago. Yeah, DePaul. It's not St. Paul. DePaul in Chicago, and she's a teacher right now. She's been teaching for 3 years already. And this is my baby. This is my grandson. He's the only boy in the family. And his name is Antonio Luis Ibarra. He chose to stay home. He studied at St. Philip's with some kind of academy with the high school. They bused him to St. Philip's to study, and he took mechanical engineering. So when he graduated from there, Toyota took him in as a full-time employee. So that's where he's working. He's going to work on his bachelor's. Yeah. And those are the only 3 grandkids I have. I have some famous ancestors here in Texas. I didn't know, my mother didn't know she had famous ancestors. So really, this history part, I'm doing it for her. I have a great aunt that gives me a lot of what she's got. Maria Olga Villanueva Gomez. But she don't like to be called the whole name. She likes to be called Mrs. V. Because when she was a nurse at she married a Cuban, and they raised her family in the Panama Canal, that area. And so she worked as a nurse, and the people at the hospital didn't know how to say Villanueva, so they call her V for short. And that's what she prefers to be called. Yeah. I have another important, to me it's important about Madame Candelaria. She was a nurse at the Alamo when the battle was fought. She was taking care of Travis, from what I gathered. And so she was recognized for that later on by an artist, a painter, that he was hired to make a painting for a president in 1919. McKinley, I think it was the president. 1909, not 1990. And so this Vernon was an artist anyway. He did the painting, and he painted Madame Candelaria walking in front of the Alamo. And her, Mrs. V, this lady that I was talking about, this is her. This is the last picture that was taken when she visited the cemetery. And so anyway, she wrote the White House to ask, after she found out about the painting, she wrote the White House to see if she could get a picture of the painting, and they sent it to her, and she's made copies, and she gave, this is a painting. And there's Madame Candelaria walking in front of the Alamo. And that's Mrs. V, Mrs. V's great-great-grandma on her father's side. So I wanted to put that in there because she went to the, after she found out about the painting, she went to the trouble of writing the White House. I have the letter and everything here. That, and she has her own little legend. This is a letter.
Okay.
And this is Madame Candelaria. She was very well known in San Antonio because, and then she, after the Battle of Alamo, she continued living here and she raised a lot of orphans because she was that kind of a person. She took them in. And some descendants of one of the children that she raised came back to look for Mrs. V, and they found her. Yeah, she says that they cried with her because they were so grateful for what her grandma had done for their family, for their, ancestry. And I have a picture here that I didn't show. This is the doors to one of the Alamos. When Blas Maria Vera was being recognized in Austin, they did a resolution on him in 2004, I think it was. They, at the museum, Bulak Museum, they have the door to the Alamo. They got it from Blas Maria Vera's ranch. Back in the 70s, I think it was, they found it. And Ann Hines was the one that declared that it was a door from the Alamo because it's made out of mesquite and it's all handmade. And that's me standing right in front of it. And guess who sent me there to be there? Mrs. V. She couldn't be there, so she told me to go in her place, and I did. Because she's a great person. She just, after she met me, she hasn't let go of me, so. But the main person in my life, in my mother's life, was Blas Maria Herrera, and he was a scout for Sam Houston and all that, for when Santa Ana was coming through. And he came through Paso de los Garzas at that time, when they were coming through from Mexico to San Antonio to fight at the Battle the Alamo. And it's just down the road from where I live, that Paso de los Garces. It's on the Medina River. Well, this cemetery was the second cemetery that the Ruiz Herrera, Blas Herrera farmed the first cemetery just west of here on the north bank of the Medina River, which was called Paso de los Garces Cemetery. But it was washed away twice, so only a few graves are still there. So then in 1842, they farmed this, after Blas Maria Herrera married Maria Antonia Ruiz, they farmed this cemetery. It used to be called the Ruiz Herrera Cemetery, but at some time or another when they sold the property connected to this, the person that bought it just put Herrera Cemetery up there on the arch. This is Blas Maria Herrera's stone, and this is the Texas Ranger Cross, which was given to him and placed here, I'd say about 3 or 4 years ago. I have the program. This is the daughter of Colonel Francisco Ruiz that married Blas Maria Herrera. This is where the Herrera and Ruizes started together. Every grave here really has a story behind it. People back then died young because they had a hard life. They sacrificed a lot. So This cemetery is a historical cemetery because of Blas Maria Herrera for what he did for the state of Texas before, even before Texas became Texas. He was born in San Antonio in 1804. And so at 17 years old, he was already a scout for the government here. There, close to where I live at Garza's Crossing, Santa Ana came through there. So he would look out for him. He was supposedly killed Indians there and Mexican soldiers. So God knows where they're buried. I don't know. But anyway, the plaque is over here. This is in 1967. This is when this plaque was put up here. The family from down from Colonel Ruiz's, they were buried here. They started here on back. And so those are descendants of Colonel Ruiz, direct descendants. And then the Herreras are buried over here on the right-hand side. He was a scout very young. There's a report from a young man from the family that states that he was killing Mexican soldiers and Indians there at Paso de los Garzas when he was 17 years old. That was his job, to be a scout. And he was the one that escorted Colonel Ruiz and his nephew to Washington at the Brazos for the signing of the Declaration. So he knew horses pretty well. Yeah. This is a picture that has been put out after he was recognized as a Paul Revere of Texas. From what I gathered, at the beginning he wasn't recognized until now. He was an ex-Texas Ranger. And at his gravesite there in the family cemetery, they came about 2-3 years ago and placed his cross on his grave. On my dad's side, their names was Nicanor Terrazas and Beatriz Morales Terrazas. They were from Del Rio area. They came over here to Lozoya, Texas, because my grandfather had family there. He had uncles living there in Lozoya. So they came very young. They were very young, I guess newly married, because my dad was born there and he was about the second or third child born. And he was born in 1911, my father. So as they had around 5-6 kids, and then once, I guess they got enough money, they bought a place there in One Army on Benton City Road. And there's where my dad was raised and the rest of the family. My father died in San Antonio. I can't remember, it was 93 years. He was 93 years old. He died in a nursing home in North San Antonio. That he was always working. He worked at different jobs, but he ended up being a self-taught carpenter. He would build houses, and he taught my 2 oldest brothers to be carpenters. My dad didn't have that much education too. He went about 4th, 5th grade. So he really was a self-taught man, for his jobs. He worked at Kelly Field here in San Antonio as a carpenter, because he had already taught himself. He knew how to read a ruler and take measurements and all of that. And back then they didn't have power tools. All they had was hand tools, And so later on, when he retired, they had the power tools. My grandfather came from Mexico. Farmers.
Farmers.
Yes. Well, I just assumed they traveled by wagon or buggy. Well, my father's grandfather, I don't remember his name. I want to say Anselmo, but I'm not sure. Because I don't have that much history on them. I just know what my dad, would tell us from Mexico. He was born in Mexico somewhere. I don't know exactly where. My dad's grandma, she was a full-blooded Indian. But we are not positive. I've been told Kickapoo tribe, but she was ousted of her tribe by her father. He beat her up for some reason, we don't know why. And my grandpa found her, and he brought her back to health, and he took her back to the tribe, and they wouldn't take her. So he kept her as his wife. And her name was Pausha. We don't know her last name. We have a 1900 census, and that's what her name was. But it was somewhere along the Mexican and Del Rio border. No, not that I know of. Although I've been told that my dad's name, Terrazas, it's in history books in Mexico, but that's all I know. I don't know anymore. Oh, my brothers never went into the service. My dad never served in the service. Sacred Heart Church there in Von Army after they were adults, yes. I have pictures of both of them. This is my grandfather before he married my grandma. We figured he was around anywhere between 16 and 17 years old. Well, I'm going to say it in Spanish. Rogelio A. Herrera. And this is the lady in black, is my grandma. And this is just not a very good picture, but this is all we have. This was taken with a friend of hers at some type of a circus. They were sitting on a motorcycle. You know how they had props for taking pictures? And that's the only picture we have of her. And we figured that she was around 16, 17 years old, maybe 15 to 16. Because this was before they got married, but on her dress, she's wearing a locket that he had given her, engraved from him to her, solid gold. So a little after that, I guess they got married, and somewhere around 1920 or so. She was born in Somerset, on the outskirts east of Somerset, Texas. Her parents had, or the whole family, there was two brothers that bought, or they gave that land to them, Spanish land grants. Antonio and Don Jesus Gonzalez. Don Jesus was her father. And her mother was Maria de Jesus Ochoa. That was her name before she married the grandpa, Gonzalez. The Gonzalez brothers, the two brothers, Antonio and Jesus, Don Jesus, they were here in San Antonio before they were given that land. From what I gather, it was thousands of acres of land. And I've been told that they were Spaniards. So for the work they did here in San Antonio, I think they gave them that land. I'm not positive. I haven't gone and researched on it. On them. And so my grandma was born in 1899, died in 1940, and my grandfather was born 1894 and died in 1925. Right here, I call this a monument. This is where my mother's direct family is buried. Her grandfather, her grandmother, and aunts and uncles. And my grandparents are buried back here. My mother's mother and her father. Ofelia González Herrera,
Your grandmother.
my grandmother. And Rogelio, they put his short name, Roger. That's what it means in English. Rogelio in Spanish and Roger in English. And this is where they're buried. Gone before I was born. Yeah, my grandma died 2 years before I was born. She had a hard life too, like my mother. So she was sick at the end. They had done surgery on her back, and they had to leave it open, and it didn't heal. And so that's eventually what she died of. The latest Herreras that were buried here, where all these flowers are at, was one of my mother's half-brothers, Roland Herrera, and his wife died first a year before, Gloria Huizar Herrera. And these are all old graves of my mother's ancestors. But my grandfather, he was born from the family of Blas Maria Herrera. And my grandpa is this one sitting right here. I recognized him right away. His name is Francisco Herrera. All these pictures are at the Wheaton Museum. The family donated a lot of these to the, but I have a great aunt that gives me a lot of what she's got. I think I had seen a picture once that somebody had showed me, and I recognized him right away. In this picture, this is, so they came from Gregorio Herrera. They were Spaniards, came through Mexico, through Laredo to San Antonio. And they did a lot of things to start the city of San Antonio. They had different duties, you know. They were all in government. My grandfather's, Rogelio's family, they were all politicians. They're on the Medina River. There's where the Blas Maria Herrera gave land to all his children. From there, from the cemetery west. And my mother's grandfather was one of the last ones to get it. He has 129 acres. So his family lived on those 129 acres. So my mother was born there in one army. And they used to call it was like a little town. This is the gravesite of Francisco Herrera, son of Blas Maria Herrera. Colonel Jose Francisco Ruiz was just related by marriage to my mother's family, but his daughter is the one that married into the family. Two, my ancestors that signed the Declaration of Independence for Texas. The first one is Jose Francisco Ruiz. He was a colonel by the time he served under three countries: Spain, Mexico, and here in Texas, in the United States, in the government. He did a lot of different things. So I have pictures of where the Declaration was signed, and all that. We've been there, we were invited. This is a sign that's about 4 miles before you get to the park where they signed the Declaration of Independence. And this is a picture of him there at the museum at Washington on the Brazos. And I have a postcard. You can barely see the people, but this is a painting that was painted by some artist, and then they made postcards for the gift shop there. So this is the hall where they signed the Declaration. And this is just pictures of my brother and his boys and I when we went to there in front of the museum.
Yes.
This is his son, the Colonel Ruiz's son. He was mayor of San Antonio when the Battle of the Alamo was fought. And he was the one that had to burn all the bodies after the battle. He was ordered by Santa Anna to bury them, burn them. So he had that duty to do that, and he did it. They're blown up of him and his nephew, Jose Francisco Navarro. He was his nephew that Colonel Ruiz helped raise him after his father died. So they did a lot of things together. They both fought at the Battle of Medina. That was the first battle before the Alamo. And they were both there, and they escaped. They didn't die. Colonel Ruiz was wounded, but he was protected by the Indians, and he was taken into Louisiana, and he was in exile for, I don't want to lie, but 7 or 10 years that he was over there before they pardoned him. He mainly associated with the Comanches. He was there. I just heard recently that that was a language that he knew most from the Indians, the Comanche language. But he really got along with all the tribes. And so after when he was in Louisiana, he helped the Indians with trading. You know how they traded back then. And I have a book here that Colonel Ruiz wrote. This was a diary. It was sort of like a diary that he kept when he was living amongst the Indians. And it's supposed to be a very rare book. It was wrote in Spanish by him, but there's a lady that translated it in English. And it's at Yale University. There's what Mrs. V gave me this. And when he came back, after he signed the Declaration of Independence, when Texas was already independent, was the first governor of Texas. And then he was the first school teacher here in San Antonio too, before he went into government. He taught school at his parents' home. And that house sits at the Whitty Museum. The mother's name was Maria Josefa Peña. They were, well, he was from Spain, but they came through Mexico. They didn't come with the Canary Islanders. Although I just read recently that he was a Canary Islander, but from what I learned so far, the Canary Islanders were sent in a group, and he was coming to Mexico. And his mother is from Monclova, Mexico. So they came to sometime in the 1700s. I don't know the exact year, but Colonel Ruiz's wife, her family came first. We just found out recently that they came and they were at the first site where the Alamo, the first Alamo was, right by the San Pedro Springs. And there's where the first Alamo was. And they moved it a couple of times after that, from what I hear from the present site. Colonel Francisco Ruiz, Jose Francisco Ruiz, wrote a letter towards his end of his, let's say, government work with the state of Texas. He was at Washington on the Brazos. He had a fort over there. He was running, but he was feeling bad. He was feeling sick. So he knew that his end was almost over, so he wrote a letter to the Archdiocese here in San Antonio asking to be buried at the cathedral. So from what I've heard, he was buried behind the first altar in the cathedral. And later on, the cathedral has been remodeled several times. It burned down, well, the cathedral burned in 1928. And it was rebuilt by all the families in San Antonio. They contributed something. And so we're not positive if he was removed from there or he was left where he was buried. But there is a headstone that the state of Texas provided for him at the San Fernando number 1, and it's right as you go in the gate to the left. So we're trying to locate the letter that he wrote to the Archdiocese. We haven't located it yet, but we're hoping to get it. The second burial site for Colonel Francisco Ruiz. He was buried behind the altar at the San Fernando Cathedral. And then later years, they moved him to this site. His daughter married into the Herrera family, Antonia Maria Ruiz. Every year, ever since I found out his burial site, I try to come and bring flowers to his burial site on his birthday. My name is Herlinda Ramos. This is the story of my life and the history behind my family. And this is done so my children and my grandchildren and great-grandchildren can know about my life after I'm gone. So I'm still learning something new about the history of both families, both sides of the family, that I didn't know before. But I'm involved in genealogy now and history, so this is where I'm learning.
Okay.
So right now I'm working towards trying to preserve our family cemetery, the Ruiz Herrera Cemetery. The embankment on the west side is being eroded real bad, and if it continues, we're gonna lose a lot of important people that were heroes here in Texas. They did a lot for Texas. So I'm in the process of trying to get help to fix that embankment. And God knows what else I can do in the future.